Jesus, the Good Shepherd. What makes him good? Because he knows the names of his disciples. He knows the names of people that he calls out. He knows the name of those of us who are called into the priesthood, maybe, or the diaconate, or to be lay ministers, or to be serving on the bishop's committee or vestries or whatever. Answering the call, that's the hard part. I remember this one old priest said to me, this was some years ago, when cell phones were coming into play. He said, when you're called in, when God calls you, it's always a collect call. And when I thought about that, I said, it's right, because, here I was, my first time out, my first job I had was in the Diocese of Los Angeles, sunny California. I'm there for 7 years. Things are going really good. And then this call came from the Episcopal Church in Minnesota, and it was just one of those things I had to look at and really explore and dig deep. And when people say, wow, you went from Southern California to cold Minnesota, I said, well, that's the collect call. So Jesus, the Good Shepherd, he can leave his flock just to go out to find the lost one. This individual, Cornelius Hill, an individual that was a deacon for many years before he was priested, but he was also a really great leader in the Oneida nation. When I read about him, I'm really struck by, who he was and what he did and how he did it, and all the while being a Christian. So I always wonder, was he also into the traditional ways as well? Did he not talk about that? We know enough about what he did in the church. So those are the kind of questions I was asking myself. But here he was out there. He was the last, according to what I read about him, he says he's the last hereditary chief of the Oneida Nation. He stood up to the powers, held on to what little they could of their land, helped preserve treaty rights, and then he was ordained at 69 years of age. I've been doing some research in the archives in the Minnesota Historical Society, and I'm reading these minutes of a lot of these Minnesota Committee on Indian Work about individuals who are in the process of ordination. They're getting training, they're starting training, and one thing that really struck me really hard was that this was in 1975-76, this one individual who was Dakota, I'm a Lakota, so a Dakota in Minnesota. He was from the Upper Sioux Reservation. He was going to be ordained, and this person writing this memo said the last person to be ordained that was either a Ojibwe or Dakota was 40 years prior. I was like, wow, that's a lot of years to go by that, just for something like that to just sit there, nothing happening. So I had to wonder, what was going on up there, both on the Ojibwe reservations and the Dakota reservations, and what was happening? Why wasn't the church doing more? And what were the people doing in their church, in their faith community, on their land? So Cornelius Hill, he was educated, went to Nashotah House, and as a teenager, he becomes one of the youngest leaders of the tribe. And I'm always reminded of the judges, when individuals sort of rise up. These individuals rise up because there's something going on within the community, within the nation. These individuals rise up and they face the powers, and then they just sort of fade away, and people kind of remember them. And we have those kind of individuals in my tribe. One person I always talk about is Crazy Horse. He was one such individual, but he wasn't Christian. And we have others like Black Elk, folks like that, who really did things for their tribe, just like Cornelius Hill. And today we honor him, we hold him up, and we remember, and we put him up there, and we think about, what did he do, how did he do it, and where was he leading his people into the future? And that's where we're at today. So we're called out to seek good, not evil, hate evil, and love good. Amen.
The Lord be with you. And also with you. Lift up your hearts. We lift them up to the Lord. Let us give thanks to the Lord our God. It is right.
Welcome, Tri-History Conference participants. We're happy that you've been able to come to our home, Oneida. We're honored to co-host the 2016 Tri-History Conference with the Oneida Nation and the Diocese of Fond du Lac. We hope you have a good time and that we can all share many stories as we come together. When we come together like this, we thank Creator for helping us to learn more of His words and learn from the words of each other. Many years ago, the Oneida people lived in what is now New York State. It was there that they came in contact with the first white men and began to learn their ways. The Oneidas met with the Dutch, French, and English missionaries over a 50-year span, and over 1,700 Oneidas, Mohawk, and Onondaga formed what we call a covenant chain of friendship, peace, and spiritual guidance with Queen Anne of England. This allowed the Episcopal Church to send missionaries into Indian country to teach the gospel. A short time later, the Oneida Indian Mission was started. The work of their missionaries among the Oneidas was soon interrupted by the Revolutionary War. Many of our people did not understand. They wondered if the war was between two brothers. After many council meetings, the Oneidas fought as an ally to the American colonies. The Oneidas faced many hardships after the war, loss of life, homes, and land. During the war, the missionaries were withdrawn from Indian country until after the war, when Bishop Hobart again started the move to send missionaries into Indian country. This was the polishing of the covenant chain of friendship, peace, and spiritual guidance. In 1822, the first Oneida party came to settle here, and we have been here since. Each time we gather together with the people and our spiritual leaders, we look at it as our polishing the chain to keep it strong, bright. This conference is part of over 300 years of polishing the covenant chain and keeping it bright with the words from Creator. I pray you have a memorable and productive conference. Yanko, which is thank you in Oneida. Welcome.
And one of the things about learning about the Episcopal tradition, especially admiring Bishop Kemper, was this idea of the Geswenta. He understood it. He understood also the covenant chain. But what I'd like to tell tonight is really the story from an Oneida history perspective rather than from the perspective of the bishops and the missionaries. And I think that's important because at the center of it were extraordinary people. In some cases more extraordinary than where they came from in New York. The leadership here was exceptional, and a lot of it centered around people, leaders that were affiliated with the church across the street. Very important. Whether it was Chief Daniel Bread, whether it was Chief Cornelius Hill, okay? Daniel Bread, who I'll talk about in a minute. Stop. There was Chief Cornelius Hill, the first priest, okay? An Oneida priest who was mentored by Bishop Kemper and went to Nashotah House, okay? Extraordinary stories. John Archiquette, whose papers are at Yale University. John Archiquette, a member of the Vestry Council of the Church. John Archiquette, the policeman, For 21 years, he was chief of police here. But he was a member of that church. He was also council member of the council. He was also the head of he was one of the leaders of the band. He was, despite what you might think about Indian police that you hear about it sometimes, he was a very compassionate man. And his papers are at Yale, and there's one box, the 3 boxes, one box deals with this church and the Vestry Council from the 1870s to about 1910 or so. It is hoped that Yale University, because they have we've been working on it for 4 years, Gordy and myself, trying to get the records. They have been digitized, and hopefully soon they'll be part of the Oneida Indian Historical Society and the Oneida community as a whole, because they tell not only the history of the church, but they tell the history of the community, of youth, of women's roles, about events and celebrations, about problems such as allotment and what came, loss of land in a lot of cases, taxation, competency commissions, and the like. It's an incredible collection, and hopefully it'll be here soon. But on the other hand, you have these 3 people, and you have others, I could mention others. On the other hand, you have people on the other side who were able and understood that there was a 2-row, that they had respect for this leadership and worked with this leadership. They included others, which we'll see in slides soon: Sybil Carter, Susan Fenimore Cooper, okay? The daughter of James Fenimore Cooper, who one Oneida lady, she said to me, "Go to Cooperstown, there's a story there." The lady that I'm looking at right now. Solomon S. Burleson, who was a dentist, a missionary who had dental training, who established the hospital. The picture is over there, all right, on the table. The hospital in 1898, 10 years before the federal government created what became known as the Indian Health Service. How do you like that one? Okay. Bishop Grafton, who sponsored the hospital. I could go on.
First of all, I would like to give thanks to the Creator for allowing us to come together like this and hopefully share the stories that we each of us have and share those together. I know some of you came from a long ways away, and I'm really interested in looking and listening to what you say and how the things that you do at your home. And what we'd like to do tonight is kind of share some of the things that we have experienced, as they said before, in conjunction with the relationship of the Oneida people and the Episcopal Church, which has extended over 300 years. Again, it goes back to, they look at the founding or the starting of the situation when a delegation of members of the Iroquois Confederacy, which included some Oneidas, had a meeting with the Queen of England. And they asked the Queen of England if they would send missionaries into our territories and help us to learn the ways of the teachings of Christianity and the gospel. And the other thing they asked of the Queen at that time is if she would work strongly with the missionaries and the people she had power and control with to keep outsiders coming in with the alcohol. Now, what I'm trying to say there is that even in those days, they realized how bad that had an effect on everybody and how bad that had an effect on our Oneida people. And they asked that in the agreement when they formed that covenant. Our people started out, as Susan White said, we dealt with the Dutch, we dealt with the French, We dealt with the English, we dealt with the colonies, and many of the Oneida people, not all, because some of them went to different religious followings, but many of the Oneidas at the time, during the early 1700s, they began to follow and practice with the missionaries that came into our territory. And they did this, and they participated, and they began to develop the mission in New York State, because that's originally where we were from. We were part of the Iroquois Confederacy, which you had the Mohawks, the Onondaga, the Cayuga, the Seneca, and the Oneidas. And that formed the Iroquois Confederacy, which is now what you would call the state of New York. It covered that much territory. They looked at their territory running from the St. Lawrence to the East Coast, down into the Carolinas, and sometimes as far as the Mississippi. That's what the Iroquois Confederacy people looked at as their territory to live in and use and use the resources that were available there. Now, the Oneidas lived in what would be now called around Utica, New York, and they had their strip in the New York State was about 4 million acres, and our people lived in that area up until the 1820s, and what they did is after the Revolutionary War, again, Susan mentioned, they sided with the colonists. Unfortunately, after the war, we did no better than the other Iroquois members that fought with the British. We really come out, all Indian people came out on the short end of that war, because the United States was using lands that they've considered theirs to compensate the people that fought in the Revolutionary War, the lands that belonged to the Indians. And to make a long story short, the lands were beginning to be occupied in one way or another, be it good, bad, or otherwise, by unscrupulous people and so on. And I think most of you know the story from the history books. Again, we lost a lot of land. And so what some of our people decided to do from the influence of Bishop Hobart, and at that time, a individual that came to join the church, and he became, I think he was kind of like a deacon, I think, and he became a leader. He was appointed to lead the church by Bishop Hobart, and his name was Eliezer Williams. He was a Mohawk, and being a Mohawk, the Mohawk language is very similar to the Oneida language. So when he would be preaching to the Oneidas, they could understand him. So that gave him a leg up in terms of trying to get people to come into the following of the church. And so he was very strong in terms of influencing members of our tribe to leave New York State. And at that time, they worked out an agreement to come out to Wisconsin. And when they came out to Wisconsin, they located here in Green Bay. And when they first came here, you can see on some of the pictures that we have here, they didn't have a place to do their worship, so they worshiped underneath the trees that you see out here. And then it wasn't long after that they built a log cabin to do their worship. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pause there, but what I also wanted to explain and share with you is going back to the covenant. We call it the covenant chain that was put together in terms of the relationship between the Episcopal Church and the Oneida people. And that's still strong. And what the stories that we're told and are made to understand is that when we come together and the leaders of the church come into our territory, such as Bishop Gunther, what we do is we polish that chain so it doesn't become rusty and break. And it's our responsibility to keep that chain shiny and bright. And these kind of functions that we have today, we had another one 2 years ago where we had an anniversary, 175th anniversary of the consecration of the Oneida Mission Church. That was polishing the chain then. Today we're having a gathering of other nations and the church and the Oneida people. So we're polishing that chain again, once again. And it's our goal to try to continue to keep that chain and keep that strong between our people and the church.
What history does is it tells us, it focuses us to see that the story of the Oneida people reeks of resurrection. It smells like the gospel. It portrays for us some of the most precious and wonderful aspects of our faith. And here it is, just sitting under our noses. A few years back, I got to meet the granddaughter of Geronimo. Wow. And I went, and it was a minister who knew her and brought me to meet her. And I went with an elder from Red Lake, where I was living at the time. We went to meet her, and it was astonishing. This was a woman who had lived in so many different worlds, who had wisdom and insight and faith and kindness and love and grace in amounts that I can't even begin to understand. And when we left, we were both very, very blessed. But the elder turned to me and she said, "That minister doesn't know what he's sitting next to." And so often, I'm not trying to say that he was particularly bad. I'm trying to say so often that's the way we are. We can be sitting next to something that is so spectacular, so wonderful, and not know that God has planted a miracle next to us, not know that God has done something great. So, what we have seen is, in my estimation, a monumental testament to the power of a saving God. In the midst of horrific pain, in the midst of a horrific experience of colonization, we have seen a people triumph. Triumph. And I think it is not for us as historians and archivists to tell a story in terms of propaganda, but it is ours to help people to see those stories, to have the clarity to see those stories, to begin to allow history to speak. I think that's our task, and I'm ready to finish now. That usually means I'm halfway done, but I am really ready to finish. That is the promise that we see here among ourselves. That is the emerging reality that is coming up among us. We have been living next to great trauma, great pain, and we have been living next to great promise and great goodness. It is our task to see it, not necessarily to praise it or to promote it, but to see it. And as I have seen and witnessed that happening here, I can only say that as much as it gives me joy to see what's happening among the Oneida, things that I see happening in other places as well, it gives me great joy that such a group as this is beginning to look at these things and beginning to deal with them. So, let's sing. This is such a good song, eh? This is a song that makes a lot of sense when you think about what we have seen and heard. The Lord hears the cry of the poor. Blessed be the Lord. Very good. The Lord hears the cry of the poor. Blessed be the Lord. I will bless the Lord at all times. His praise ever in my mouth. Let my soul glory in the Lord, for he hears the cry of the poor. The Lord hears the cry of the poor. Blessed be the Lord. The Lord hears the cry